we're going to touch. Thank you. I was about to remind you. Thank you. We're going to talk about the arms trade, what it is, and why it's important. We're going to focus especially on the UK arms trade because that's what CAAT knows most about. We're going to touch a bit on integrated review versus human security and talk about why the government's plans for military investment are probably not going to make anybody safer. Then I think, I'm sorry, it's, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Stuart? Stuart?
Yeah, Sherwood, close
Sherwood.
enough. Anything close. Yeah, no.
Thank you.
No,
so I was talking to Sherwood, and we're going to have a few minutes break at that point. Then we're going to come back to talk about a little bit about Afghanistan and some of the sort of arms that have been shipped there. And then we're going to talk about what you can do, sort of some next steps. So we're going to suggest that if you've got some questions, we can handle them at the end. But if something's not clear, just give us a shout and I can always clarify it as we go along. Okay. So what is the UK arms trade? It's kind of summarized in this little picture here. This is a picture of a Eurofighter Typhoon. And it's on display outside. I think it's outside of the showrooms at Farnborough. So the UK exports about £10 billion worth of equipment every year. Sometimes a bit more, like in 2019, it's about 11 billion. Sometimes a bit less, so sometimes it's 6 or 7 billion, but about 10 billion a year, of which a quarter is aircraft and components. So as well as sort of shipping complete weapons systems of the kind you're looking at here, also once somebody's flying one of these planes, they require a lot of spare parts just to keep them in the air. And so the deal is very much for, you buy the aircraft and then you get the services. Can I beg a favor, if you're not muted, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, that would be kind. Thank you. Yes, so everybody got muted, but I also got muted too. So thank you. So that's fine. Thank you. So yeah, so about a quarter of what we ship is aircraft and components, but about 3 to 4, 5% is what we call small arms, and those are what we think of when you think of as guns and bullets. So the UK is quite a big weapons exporter. And it ships quite a lot of it. The people we mainly ship it to are these folk. Something like 40% of our arms exports go to Saudi Arabia. That's a slightly bold statement, and I think the thing to say about it as well is we have a lot of toing and froing between ourselves, Germany, France, and America, where they ship components to us, we make aircraft, ship them back to them, they do something, they ship it back to us. So a lot of backwards and forwards. But in terms of exporting to actually ship the final product, the Saudis are our biggest customer. Saudi Arabia has more advanced fighter jets than the RAF, and it buys the majority of them from Britain. So they're a huge customer for ours. In fact, they're one of the biggest arms buyers in the world. The other big thing that we tend to ship a lot of to Saudi Arabia are missiles, in particular cruise missiles, which are launched obviously from the fighters, but also bombs called paveway bombs. And those bombs we will talk about a little bit later because they tend to be used in some of the wars that Saudi Arabia is currently fighting. Who's selling? Well, the clue is in the picture. This is actually a picture outside DSEI. Well, in fact, it's a picture I think on one of the stations, one of the DLR stations near DSEI, and you can see the gentleman with his hands in his pockets, frowning. Is indeed an arms dealer. So yeah, we have some very large arms companies in the United Kingdom. The big one really is BAE Systems, which is far and away the largest arms company in the country. So by certain measures, between the third and the sixth largest in the world. But also we ship a lot of weapons indeed from American-owned companies, for example, Raytheon. We have companies which specialize in, for example, policing and riot control weapons, companies like PW Defense, which used to be part of Chemring. And also, for each of these companies, you've got dozens and dozens of different small suppliers and different things. There's a supply chain as well as the finished product. So let's talk about the impact of the arms trade. And you're looking at one of the impacts is warfare. So conflict is a big part of what the arms industry does. And what you're looking at here is a bomb that's been used on a building in Sana'a, which is the capital of Yemen. Saudi Arabia has been fighting a war with elements of Yemeni society, the Houthis. It's been going on for something like 6 years, and in that time, the UK government has publicly confirmed that it's permitted £6.5 billion worth of weapon sales to Saudi Arabia. But in fact, looking at some of their sort of open licenses, which are in fact secret licenses, in the sense of once you have an open license, you can just keep shipping stuff and not really keep tabs of what's going on. We think something like £20 billion worth of military equipment has been sold to Saudi Arabia during the war in Yemen. Almost all of it aircraft parts, and rockets and bombs, like the paveway bombs that we were talking about earlier. So what you're looking at here is a British-made disaster, and they're found parts of these sort of weapons in places like cement factories, and also the Saudis have been tied to the bombing of schools and hospitals on dozens of occasions. The impact of that, certainly in Yemen, has been pretty catastrophic. So it's led to the death of something like 8,000 people in the raids themselves, along with another 100,000 in the wider conflict. And it's put something like 80% of the population in need of food aid, and about half of Yemen has no meaningful access to medical care. So it's been a huge disaster, and the flow of arms has kept on going. Apart from about 6 months where we managed to sue the government to put a stop to it, but they evaded the court judgment. Second big impact of arms sales are repression or oppression, probably a bit of both. So what you're looking at here is a young man who's running away from a tear gas grenade, which is very likely produced by indeed Chemring PW Defense. The gentleman concerned is in Bahrain, and so arms sales help these sort of repressive regimes stay in power. So by selling these weapons, they can control their population and stay in power. But also they buy these sort of prestige weapon systems that give them real kind of international clout. It means they can take part in peacekeeping missions or the latest round of bombings in, say, Iraq or Afghanistan, as part of coalitions with Western forces. So it gives them a real kind of leg up from that perspective. And in this particular case, the Bahrainis are being rewarded for providing a British military base, I think it's the Al Saman base there in Bahrain. The third impact of the arms trade is corruption. So one of the things you tend to see about the arms industry is, and this is according to Andrew Feinstein, who's an author. He says that something like 40% of global corruption is tied to the arms industry, and the arms industry itself is really only worth about 1.5% of global international trade. So it's disproportionately corrupt. Here's some of the headlines from, as it happens, BAE Systems, but almost every arms company has had these sort of investigations linking it to some terrible things. So when you think about the arms industry, certainly the British arms industry, it's mostly the export of planes, rockets, and bombs. they keep shipping them to countries that are fighting wars, such as the Saudi Arabia conflict in Yemen. They use the weapon sales to prop up corrupt regimes, and everybody gets paid. So it's a big corruption scandal. So that's the arms industry, and if that was all there was to it, that would be enough. But as they say, there is more. So we're going to talk a little bit about uh, the integrated review. So the integrated review is one of these kind of big kind of episodes in British defence planning, as it were, as they call it, British military planning, where they're plotting forward the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years worth of warfare as far as the British are concerned, and then handing over a whole bunch of cash to the arms companies to make it to make the weapon systems. The reason that's relevant, well, there's two reasons it's relevant. Maybe there's three reasons it's relevant. For one thing, this is your money. That's the HMS Queen Elizabeth that was built with UK taxpayers' money. Essentially a floating airstrip. So it's certainly relevant because it's money that could be spent elsewhere, and we'll look at the balance of military spending versus balance on, say, climate change looks like. Second reason is, as I say, it's putting a whole bunch of money into the pockets of the arms companies, who then take the weapons that are developed for the UK arms industry and then sell it overseas, sort of driving wars and other disasters. And the third thing is, in a time where climate chaos and climate disaster is a real concern, you are looking at a big burner of fossil fuels. The military sector in the world is actually one of the biggest users of fossil fuels, and so from that perspective, it's not only is it not serving some of the key needs for our individual security, environmental security, or perhaps social security, but also it's actually contributing to the problems that we should be solving. So what is the integrated review? Well, it started in 2019 after the general election, and is really their intention is to reflect the changing circumstances in the world. They were doing this before COVID arrived, and despite all this military spending, I'm afraid the tanks and the bombs and the guns and the planes didn't stop the arrival of COVID. Funny that really, but also connected with the UK leaving the EU. But more importantly, the government had overcommitted to what it calls defence equipment. It had pretty much just spent a whole ton of money on kind of weapons designed to fight previous wars, and then suddenly realized it needed weapons to fight today's wars. So there's a lot of that going on. And that'll be where we talk about some of the new military technologies that they are quotes investing in. And the reason that's quite relevant, and it's especially relevant this week, is these military technologies are going to be on display at DSEI. They're going to be on display at the Liverpool Arms Fair, which is taking place next month. And they're already trying out some of these new military technologies. I see they were flying a drone across the North Sea today. So I mean, it's all going on, and so hopefully this will give you a sense of what the UK is doing with its money when it comes to giving money to arms dealers. And the final thing that I think they're going to be thinking about are what they call peer adversaries, which I think is a very interesting form of thinking about China and Russia, ancient countries with long traditions who so far have we have decided not to attack us over the last 70 or 80 years, but suddenly there are peer adversaries. And also climate change is a thing. And actually they do talk about it in the integrated review. So there's three papers going on. There's the integrated review, which is kind of the overview paper. There's the Defence Command paper, which is really talking about what the military is going to do with its stuff. And there's the Defence Industrial Strategy, which is how the arms companies are going to make stuff for the military. So the first thing to talk about in terms of British military spending is existing defence equipment plans. And the thing about it is, most of Britain's defence money, as they call it, military money, goes on pretty much what you're looking at. It goes on the big old aircraft carriers. You've got your, in fact, that's a mock-up of one of the new ballistic missile submarines, one of the new nuclear submarines. And in the top left is the F-35 jet, which happens to be landing on the aircraft carrier, but is the new jet. So the British government has spent a ton of money on these existing things. As well as the kind of warships that you were looking at, each of them requires a whole bunch of stuff to protect them. Actually, I'll go back to what we're just looking at here. So to keep these little bits of kit secure, they can't look after themselves. And so one of the big things the government is doing in this defence spending review is it's buying 8 Type 26 and 5 Type 31 frigates. So frigates sit alongside the old aircraft carrier and make sure that submarines don't sneak up on it. And they also sit on top of the submarine and make sure that ships don't come along and drop depth charges on it, I guess. And they're also developing a new warship, a Type 32, which is a destroyer. And because they're now going to have so many new ships, they're actually building a fleet of support ships to go with it. So they bought these kind of giant white elephant systems designed to fight the 20-year-old war on terror, as we talked about, and in the case of the nuclear submarines, to fight the Cold War. And then to protect them, they have to buy then a whole bunch of Type 31 frigates, which they're all buying, and Type 26 frigates, which they're buying from BAE Systems. So as I say, nice work if you can get it. That would be fine if it wasn't for the fact that the military environment has changed. So what you're looking at here is a drone, which is an unmanned aircraft, which is being used to fight wars. And as soon as the Defense Command paper came out, they were talking a lot about the drone wars that took place between Azerbaijan and not Georgia, it is Armenia. So Azerbaijan and Armenia, where Armenia had took an absolute kicking from the Azerbaijanis, who had very cheap drones sold to them by Turkey. And immediately that came out, the British government decided that what they wanted to do was to get all these new drones and all this new space defense to stop these drones attacking our brave British boys. And what they also wanted were these really long, high-speed missiles. So you can see what you're looking at here are the new military technologies. Now you'll notice that they didn't decide to scrap the previous ones. So all this stuff is going to be attracting something like 1.7 billion per year in terms of military research funding to sort of research all this stuff and to move the country into this kind of the next generation of warfare, while still keeping all the old stuff. And again, this is primarily aimed at defeating the peer adversaries, so Russia and China, as they would call it. But again, it turns out that the Taliban weren't even defeated either. So it's all warfare all the time, which is fantastic if you're an arms company. So as I say, in summary, this is what they're doing. So they're increasing the number of nuclear warheads, again, declaring interest. Vice Chair of the Nuclear Information Service. This is not a very good thing if you're an anti-nuclear person. All the new frigates, more destroyers, ship-to-ship missiles, which they're building with the French. A new generation of unmanned fighter, Joy, Tempest, and their old future, the old systems that they bought, the F-35 and the Typhoon Eurofighter isn't clear, but the chances are they'll flog that off to the likes of Saudi Arabia and then declare that they need to have all these new aircraft to defend against these advanced threats. So all in all, it's a bit of a scam. The army will have fewer soldiers, fewer tanks, more long-range munitions, which means missiles, and there'll be new space command and more cyber. So there we are. So that, as they say, is that. Who'll benefit? Well, this guy again. So he will definitely benefit. So most of the money is indeed going to the arms industry. None of which would be so bad if we weren't in the middle of a climate crisis. And so if you look at the government's military spending over the next year or two, annual spending, is running at about 40 billion per year, whereas according to Scientists for Global Responsibility, we're spending less than 5 billion a year on reducing UK carbon emissions. Likewise, we're seeing some fairly big increases in the military in the period that's being looked at. What this doesn't show is actually there was a cut in 2019 of overseas aid, which was affecting Afghanistan as amongst other places, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But as you can see, sort of military spending is due to rise by, as you can see, 4, 5, 6 billion a year over the sort of 2021 level. And similarly, reducing UK carbon emissions will be going up, but only by 2 billion a year. And as I say, overseas development aid through 2021 will be coming down for 3.5 billion versus 2020 and 4.5 billion versus 2019. And what they're showing is that the initial breakdown of the cuts, and we've heard of this in practice, is being experienced by the poorest nations. So Yemen would only receive half of its previous amount. So as well as getting blown to pieces by our weapons, the aid that we were sending to help Yemen has actually been cut in half. And similarly, Syrian aid has been cut by 2/3, and reductions are expected in Afghanistan, Libya, and Pakistan, according to Open Democracy. And overseas sanitation and water programs are being cut by 80%, all to pay for these wonderful new frigates to protect weapon systems that we don't actually need. So there we are. And so the real question that I think we'll leave you with before we go into our little break is, well, what's kind of being forgotten about here? And I'll leave you to think about what isn't included in all this spending, but it might include education, might include health, might include transport systems. It's all being spent on this stuff. Okay, so that I think will take us to the next thing. So Stuart, shall we take a sort of 5-minute break as we talked about, and then we'll come on and talk to Afghanistan and what we can do, what you can do to put a stop to some of this stuff. Is that okay?
Yes, Kirsten, thank you very much indeed. Lots to think about. So see you in 5 minutes, everyone.
See you in 5. Lovely. Okay. So shall I begin again? That's so we
Oh, well, Kirsten, let's chat for just 1 minute or so.
yeah.
I think people might have been taking the 5 minutes literally, so
Okay. Oh,
we'll
that's
wait
fine.
for Karen and Jenny Braithwaite to show that they're there.
No worries at all.
Yeah. By the way, I was interested in that mention of Tempest. I hadn't come across that, and an unmanned fighter that is being developed. Do you know
Yeah.
anything about it?
Yeah, it's called the FCAS, the Future Combat Air System, and it's being co-developed between BAE Systems and the Italian company Leonardo. And the idea of Tempest is that yeah, it will be an unmanned fighter system, but also it will have people that could sit in it as well. So it's a combination of an unmanned fighter system that could also have a pilot as well. And the concept is that as well as having the principal, I mean, this is kind of science fiction stuff, as well as having the principal stuff, it will have one or more wingman drones that kind of fly along with it. So you've got that basically then, so the wingman drone is busy protecting the aircraft whilst the aircraft is doing the horrible things that it is being designed to do. So it's all very sci-fi, but that is what Tempest is. The government thinks enough of it. I think they this last month they bunged. I don't mean to get the figures wrong, but something like 100 million quid over to BAE Systems to fund the development. So yeah, it is.
Right.
It's nice work if
Fascinating.
you can get it, isn't it? Really.
Yeah. No, you just wonder what's going on in the committee meeting when someone says, "Oh, this is better than a drone."
Yeah, well, and of course they're also looking at the next generation of drones as well. Should you find yourself with 5 minutes to look at the Drone Wars website, by the way, a good Oxfordshire-based campaigning organisation against the arms trade, but they look at drones, so Drone Wars, and they're saying that they're going to be flying 2 new drones over UK airspace. They did one last month, and they'll be doing one I think next month, or maybe later this month. Actually, it's September now, so yeah, it will be later this month. So yeah, so they're looking to buy the next generation of drones, and these drones, they can actually fly overhead in the UK. Previously, they were very reluctant to actually fly drones overhead in the UK because drones have an unfortunate habit of crashing. But they were perfectly willing to fly drones over other people's countries, which is what they did. But now they've had permission from the Civil Aviation Authority to actually fly them over our heads. So we could now have permanent drones flying over our heads. So we're getting those too. Fabulous. So Drone Wars. I definitely recommend checking out the
Kirsten,
website.
I think we must all be complete again. Go ahead.
All right. I shall begin. So we're going to talk about Afghanistan, and then we're going to talk about kind of next steps and what's happening, probably around DSEI, but also other things too. So let's see if I can just share my screen. Where's my? There we go. All right. So moving on. Okay. So Afghanistan. We also sort of talk a little bit about Afghanistan, and this is a picture here of a man from Afghanistan. It was taken in 1985, and the weapon he's holding is a Lee Enfield rifle, and I think looking at it, it's a Lee Enfield Mark III, so World War II era. This was taken 40 years after this weapon was current with the British forces, and the rifle was still being used then to shoot in that particular instance at the Russians. But in 2010, a squad of US Marines came under fire while they're on patrol in Afghanistan, and they're engaged by some of the Taliban, and after they killed the attackers, they found that they were using rifles just like this one, literally Lee Enfields, and also a Mauser rifle, which was the German equivalent of the day. So weapons that are 70, 80, 90 years old still being used in Afghanistan to fight today's wars. And I think the message for that is that once you put weapons into a country, it is extraordinarily hard to get weapons out of it. So a reminder of the war in Afghanistan, and again, we're not going to talk too long about it, but we're going to say some words. I mean, the CIA arrived in September 2001 after the two Twin Towers. US forces arrived in November, and they threw the Taliban out the same month. There was then a kind of civil war for the last 20 years, which cost 47,245, which is a very precise number, but apparently this is the number. Afghan civilians, their lives, and the cost of Afghanistan and Iraq together was greater than $2 trillion. And apparently, according to the estimates that I saw, that the United States will end up paying something like $6 trillion, because the thing about it is the arms companies don't take a credit card. The governments have to borrow to fund their wars. So it's been a really expensive thing. Now the British ourselves have been sort of shipping weapons over to Afghanistan. The earliest figures we have to go back to 2008. And the UK has shipped something like £151 million worth of, or rather has approved military licenses of £151 million for Afghanistan since 2008. So not billions and billions, but by an awful lot of rockets, bombs, and guns for sure. Additionally, the UK has approved something like 86, it says, unlimited value open licenses. So you've got two types of export licenses for weapons. One is a kind of a for purpose license. So you ship the weapon and you know what's being shipped. So you want to buy $15 million worth of £50 million worth of aircraft, and then that's what you ship. Whereas with an open license, you say, hey, I'd like to buy a few guns, I'd like to buy a few rockets, I'd like to buy a few grenades. Don't really know how much I'm going to buy, but if I can use this license to ship it, that would be great. And then you never hear how much has been shipped. However, our friend Ian Overton over at AOAV, he'd done a bit of a study, and he took a look into it, and he reckons they've managed to inherit 22,000 Humvees, well, you can see on the screen, 22,000 Humvees, 64,000 machine guns, 358,000 assault rifles, 33 Black Hawk helicopters, as I say, 176 artillery pieces, and 126,000 pistols. I think for us, the concern's probably going to be the weapons, because Afghan culture, as you see, is really good at maintaining sort of weapons, guns. For my sins, back in the late 80s, in fact, not long after the picture that you previously saw was taken, I actually spent some time in the northwest part of Pakistan, just northwest of Peshawar. And there was at that time there was a really large industry that was involved in kind of taking stolen Russian weapons, copying them, getting weapons that were broken, repairing them, and shipping them back into Afghanistan. And that industry hasn't gone away. So there's a huge amount of support for weapons. So these assault rifles, pistols, machine guns, they're going to be operative from now until forever if they're still in the country. The helicopters and the Humvees, perhaps not so much, but that's the worry. And the challenge is, with all the stuff that you're putting into the country, how do you take it out again? And the answer is you don't. So I'm afraid that's the news. And really, the only thing you can do, and this is I think been our line when it comes to Afghanistan, is you've really got to make a risk assessment of the regimes to whom you're selling. And right now, the government clearly doesn't do that. It thought it was absolutely okay to ship hundreds of millions of pounds worth of equipment to the Afghan regime, knowing that in all probability that the weapons will be left in the country, because they always are. It happened in Libya, happened in Afghanistan, happened in Iraq. It's happening here. So not good news, but then that's the arms trade. The arms trade never brings good news. Nothing good about the arms trade. So what can you do? Well, we like to encourage a bunch of activities, and I know that you obviously head down to Fairford. Protest is going on, so right now, indeed, starting from this coming Monday, there'll be a week of protests at DSEI, culminating in a big day of action called Tanking the Arms Fair, which will take place on the 14th of September. So if you fancy joining the protests, that's all there, and there'll be a link at the end of the presentation, or just Google CAAT events and you'll see everything that's going on. Certainly, one of the things you can do is definitely lobby. It's always a good thing to write to your MP and talk about the arms trade. I don't know who the MP is for Faringdon. I'm sure somebody will tell me, but definitely write to them. You know, the more they hear from you, the better it is. And absolutely, you should be telling them not to be shipping weapons to Saudi Arabia, and definitely not to start to refight the war in Afghanistan. Doing outreach is definitely part of the plan. That's what we're doing now. Finding out about things, you know, sharing the knowledge, everything else. Should you find yourself going to the DSEI Arms Fair, there'll be quite a bit of this. There's also a lot of that going on up at Liverpool next week on the 11th of September, where they'll be doing a big old protest. That's true, but also they've been doing an awful lot of exactly what you're looking at here, explaining to people why the arms trade's important. And finally, as I say, you know, when we're kind of resisting the arms trade, let's not forget the sort of media. Our friends down in Melbourne have been running a great media campaign of open letters and press releases and getting onto the BBC, talking about the Melbourne Arms Fair there. You know, the kind of story that they're talking about is very much how their beloved showground, which should be showing you know, the produce of the area, which I think is cows and sheep and goats, but also includes horticultural produce, is in fact selling weapons. So that's what we're doing here. And really, alongside media is, as you can see, Andrew there is standing in front of the court, and actually taking the government to court is part of what we do. It is funded through very kind donations. And finally, if you're interested online on the CAAT website, you'll find there's a whole bunch of research to help you look up your local arms companies, find out about local arms fairs, see whether your MP if they're a minister, has been meeting with arms trade officials, all that good stuff. And the final thing that we like to do is we like to look after each other. So as much as part of the resistance as lying in the middle of the road are the people that help. So standing up is a legal observer. Sitting down with her back to us is the mental health first aider. Just basically keep them calm, talking to the activists and making sure they're doing a good thing. And whether people are babysitting or looking after pets or driving people to or fro, or perhaps looking after them when they get released from jail, that's also a big part of what we can do. So even if you don't fancy lying in the road at Dicey, should you fancy doing police station support, I'm absolutely sure they'll be really pleased to hear from you. So as I say, coming up, we've got DSEI in September, which is, as I say, protests start from Monday, going through to the 14th. You've got DPRTE in October, which will be down in Farnborough. You've also got the Melbourne Arms Fair, which will also be in. Actually, this is the wrong way around. Liverpool's in October, DPRT is in October, and Melbourne is in November. And at all of these events, it's going to be a mix of talks, seminars, protests, and vigils, and you can find out more on the CAAT website. So caat.org.uk/events. And there are some more links there. That's probably more links than you want to take, but it'll be on the video, so you can do that. And it also talks about some of our university work as well. And that, I think, is that. So hopefully that gives you a kind of sense of what the arms trade is getting up to in terms of its exports, what it's flogging to the British government, and how it's being used in particular wars, both Yemen, which we talked about, but also Afghanistan. So if you've got any questions, really happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. We're a small enough group for people to, if you want to unmute yourself or just stick your hand up or use the hand raising function on Zoom, any of those methods is absolutely fine. Kirsten, can I just start? Yeah, Karen, thank you. I've seen your hand. Can I just start by saying you've mentioned all the arms fairs coming up in the UK, but I've kind of half assumed that if it's the military industrial complex, the BAs of the world that are selling to other countries, that there are a lot of their sales will be done in arms fairs in Saudi, for example, or whatever. How does that proportion work out?
I think that's a really good question. The answer is you're right. There are arms fairs across the world, and it's one of the things that's been our little secret joy that we've been doing with some of the work they've been doing with international groups. Is we have a network of different campaign groups campaigning in different areas. So including Canada and Colombia and certainly France, but also Australia. So the Land Forces Arms Fair was the last big one that took place, I think, globally. And there was massive resistance down there in Australia, to the extent that the person joined the call whilst we were having we have had regular kind of calls just to talk, and they actually joined the call from the protest as the protesters were being dragged off a tank or whatever it was from there. So yeah, so there are a bunch of arms fairs. I guess what I would say though is that the big decisions tend to be made at places like DSEI, because what tends to happen, that tends to be a kind of nexus of kind of schmoozing of government ministers from both the countries being sort of influenced or targeted, as it were, the UK and then the arms companies themselves. So the way it works is the UK invites these delegations over, and even in normal years, it's a bit of a scam, where effectively what they do is they invite these delegations over, they put them up in a swanky London hotel, give them pocket money to kind of look around, and then of course the ministers and their families then buy a lot of stuff in the shops in Oxford Street or Bond Street, and so it becomes a very big personal shopping experience for the ministers themselves. So that's one of the reasons why DSEI tends to be a real focus for decision making. But yeah, they're trying to kind of have arms fairs in places like the UAE, and they definitely do take place, and the UK definitely sends representatives to them. And ditto, Korea has quite a large. South Korea has a large what they call IDEX. But as I say, resistance, at least the democratic countries, is actually pretty high, and the South Koreans are legends in terms of their protesting.
Thank you, Karen.
Hi, thanks very much for that, Kirsten. Very
Pleasure.
Interesting. A couple of years ago, I think it was, there was a great victory with the embargo on weapon sales to Saudi. Could you tell us where that is now? Because I think it rather lapsed, didn't it?
Well, what happened was back in April 2019, we took the government to the Court of Appeal, and we basically won. And so what the Court of Appeal said was the government had been irrational and therefore unlawful in terms of authorizing weapon sales to Saudi Arabia. And the reason it said that is because the government hadn't made an assessment of the human rights implications of the sales. In particular, it hadn't looked at the 100 or so incidents that have been reported from bombing, where essentially civilians, infrastructure, things like schools and hospitals have been targeted. So the Court of Appeal said, well, why are you selling weapons where you've got the rules that say you don't sell to weapons where they could be used for humanitarian abuses? Where you've got literally dozens of cases where they're kind of worrying about for human rights stuff. And although you've looked at the individual cases, you've not really connected the fact that actually there are dozens and dozens of these, and maybe actually, although each one might appear to be an isolated instance, maybe there's a pattern here and you need to assess that. And so whilst they were making that assessment, the the arms sales came to a stop, and there was a bit of shilly-shallying around, but it put a stop to them for about 6 months, and it stopped several hundred million, as far as we can tell, several £100 million worth of sales to Saudi. But the thing about it is the government decided that it could mark its own homework, and it said, well, actually, Mr. Government, we've now done this assessment, and we're completely happy that we'll continue selling weapons to the Saudis, and guess what? We're going to start authorizing things again. And we said, hold up, wait a minute, we're going to take you back to court, and we have done. And so we've got permission to kind of bring them back into court at some point during 2022. But of course, whilst that second court case is going on, they are cheerfully selling weapons to the Saudis and making up for lost time. And by the way, before the judgment came in on the Court of Appeal, it was pretty clear there was quite a big spike in shipments because they were trying to get the shipments out before the judgment. So I think you've got to say that the court system, while it is broadly supportive of what we do and has been again, recently very supportive by releasing some of these sort of dicey protesters who were arrested, I think 4 years ago, but who the courts then turned around and say, well, actually, they had a perfect right to do what they were doing, which was a great judgment. So while the courts are broadly sympathetic to what we're doing, the truth is that the court system is pretty heavily weighted towards the government. It's democracy. We vote in these people, and the courts are pretty reluctant to get into the way of government policy. But as I say, we're doing the best we can, and as I say, when we return, we've got permission to take them back to the High Court, and take them back we shall. But it'll be during next year, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
Pleasure.
Do we have other questions?
Yeah, I thought.
Jenny.
Hello, Kirsten.
Hi, Jenny.
I was a little bit. I noticed that you hadn't drawn any attention to the weapons that are being made in this country and being sold to be used, sold to the Israelis to be used against the Palestinians. This is something which our peace group is particularly interested in, since some of us had the tremendous opportunity of going to Palestine a good few years ago now, but meeting with Palestine. So we have this ongoing interest in what is happening, particularly in that part of the world.
Well,
sorry, can I
go ahead.
just say a bit more? We're particularly interested in the work of Palestine Action, who've actually managed to stop production of weapons, obviously only for a short period of time, but they have actually interfered with the production of the weapons. And we are in touch with the groups that in the north that are doing this sort of action. And I would like to hear, what Campaigning Against the Arms Trade, what links you have with that sort of work.
No, it's thank you. No, it's worth it's good to talk about. Yeah, and the answer is that for those who may not be aware, Israeli arms company Elbit Systems has a whole bunch of subsidiary companies in the UK. One of which includes UAV engines up at Shenstone, which is obviously quite a big target of Palestine Action, actually, as well as Ferranti at Oldham. There's some others as well, but those are kind of the big ones. Another big supplier into the Israeli arms industry is L3 Harris, better known as EDO MBM, who operate out in Brighton. And so there's been a long pro-Palestine demonstrations down there in Brighton outside the EDO MBM factory there. So and those protests too have included direct action and a degree of property destruction. The answer is with Palestine Action, the challenge that we have is the pro-Palestine movement has different strands to it, and Palestine Action are, if you like, a direct action strand, but they're not necessarily recognised as a part of the BDS movement. So we know Palestine Action pretty well. We quite often publicise the Oldham Peace and Justice protests up outside Ferranti, so we know them pretty well. But we tend not to know very much about what they're doing when it comes to direct action. So they probably quite rightly keep it to themselves. So we hear about it, but then we're never quite sure what Palestine Action have done or are doing. So we're slightly cautious about sharing lots of information about what they're doing. But again, as I say, we know them pretty well. We know the people pretty well, and we've worked with them on previous projects before. Huda, who organises Palestine Action, was absolutely one of my opposite numbers in 2019 at DSEI. She and I we got up to all kinds of mischief together. So I am very aware of them. And I personally like them. But from the point of view of CAAT, when they're kind of doing some of the direct action stuff, we have to, if you like, let them do what they do, while at the same time, where we can, providing sort of help and support behind the scenes. And certainly when their defendants have come to us for information to support their court cases, we're doing quite a lot of that kind of research work for them. So that's kind of how we help, really. So yeah, it is because direct action, as I'm afraid, as a kind of registered company and operating with charitable funds, there's a limit to what we can do to encourage be involved with that sort of work, the kind of work that they're doing. We can kind of sort of inform people of their rights, give people research, support them with kind of welfare type stuff, but in the end, if somebody's going to do those sorts of actions, that's a decision for them. So that's the limit, that's kind of the boundary that we have to kind of strike. So a long answer, but a short, hopefully.
Could I just, unless anyone else wants to ask a question?
Go ahead.
Could I just ask a brief follow-up? What about RAF Waddington? We've heard that some of the weapons are actually tested at Waddington before they go to Palestine. Because as you know, when they're sold to the Israelis, they're sold as, what do you call it? Battle tested. Sorry, perhaps I'm mixing up. When the weapons are sold abroad to various countries, they are sold as being battle tested, and they've been tested in Palestine.
Of course, they have, yeah.
But what about Waddington? Is that correct that they are tested there?
Well, I think what you're talking about there is very, very likely the UK purchases of drone technology from Israeli companies. And I think this is the thing to bear in mind, is that although we sell stuff to Israel, we also buy stuff from Israel. And typically what we buy from Israel are these kind of these so-called watchkeeper drones that were built by Elbit, I think based on their Hermes 450 model, and Thales, who are a French company. So they put together a joint venture company, and those sorts of drones were bought. And I think that's actually the testing that you're talking about was some of the stuff I was talking about earlier. That's probably going to be Israeli technology they're probably testing there. I don't know for sure. Funny enough, they don't tend to write to me and say, this is what we're doing, but it could very well be what you're talking about. I guess what I would say, we don't have a CAAT group at Waddington, but the very wonderful Drone Wars UK, who are good friends of ours, have organised a protest at Waddington last month, which we promoted, and so are, if you like, how we support the protests at Waddington and also up at RAF Kinloss. So yeah, there's some grim stuff going on, and I think it's one of the things that we're quite worried about is actually these incoming new drones that are being tested at RAF Waddington. Again, I don't know exactly where the technology is coming from, but it could very well be coming from that sort of source. And yeah, it's a worrying development overall. So yeah.
Thank you.
Is that another hand, Jenny, in your screen?
Yes, it's my husband.
I see. Yeah. Phil, we need to see more than just your hand.
Well, behind everything.
Hi, Phil.
Right. Some years ago, we asked Pat whether the Fairford Air Show.
Sorry, Phil.
Yeah.
You need to have your mouth in front of the microphone, not on the side, where Jenny had it.
Yes, right. Right. Some
Yeah.
years ago, we asked CAAT whether the Fairford Air Show was really an arms fair, and the answer from CAAT at the time was they didn't think it was. But if you've
Okay.
ever been to Fairford and seen the money that's been splashed on organising it, I can hardly believe it. So has further research by CAAT revealed anything?
I don't know where you got the answer from. I don't know.
Well, it
But
was definitely from CAAT.
oh, I can imagine. I can imagine. So, I think over time, bearing in mind the phrase arms fair was pretty much defined by by CAAT to define to bring together some fairly diverse different types of events. So I think that's true. But I think over time we've understood that air shows are often actually just marketplaces for weapons, and so yeah, it's certainly when Farnborough Air Show returns, we'll be again focusing on resisting that. And in the case of Fairford, I think it's pretty clear that it is an arms fair. To which end, it's one of these things where what we tried to do over this year at least is kind of rebalance the kind of support we give to DSEI versus these other arms fairs, which would include Fairford. So should you find yourself with the Fairford Arms Fair taking place and you know where it looks like a thing to go to, definitely let us know. And you know, if we're running something called the Stop the Arms Fairs Fund, which is kind of handing out small grants to different groups who are planning mischief against whether it's Malvern or Liverpool or the DPRT down in Farnborough. And absolutely, if mischief is being planned down at Fairford, let us know, and we'll send you the link, and you can put in for some funds, because we had some really kind donors who said, oh, we want to help sort of everybody who's trying to get to the arms fairs. And you know, if that means a few hundred quid for leaflets or transport or train tickets, you know, really happy to help. So again, that's kind of how we're doing it now, which is sort of absolutely let DSEI, and there'll be a whole bunch of protests there, but also trying to kind of share the support and help for all the different arms fairs. And you know, should that be a thing that you're wanting to do, we can then start to connect you with everybody else who's protesting arms fairs across the country. So it's part of the work that we do. So, and Fairford, I think, definitely counts.
Thank you.
John.
I'll try and mute myself first. What occurs to me is that much of the financing and much of the current fueling of the weapons industry is built on oil and fossil fuels. And I just sort of turning over in my head, and I can't really think of an answer as to what the future, looking at this long-term review, integrated review and such like, is what impact that will have. Are we going to find that oil is not the driver anymore? It might be cyber technology, and a different element enters the whole equation.
And it's a thing we immediately after the integrated review came out, we hosted a panel on what they called real human security, which was essentially based on some of the thinking that Rethinking Security have done, looking at, well, what does the future look like, and you know, what's involved in terms of some of this sort of arms conversion and moving away from fossil fuels and taking the resources that we spend on defense and kind of using it for more peaceful purposes. And it's pretty clear, again, from the statistics that we showed, is that the money is definitely there to decarbonize the economy and to kind of move us forward. And therefore, to what extent do we then need to be, if you like, protecting fossil fuels? But the truth is, as you look at the integrated review and the defence industrial strategy, it's almost as if the climate crisis isn't happening. They're like, well, business as usual. The world's going to heck in a handbasket. Let's build more ships. Let's build more aircraft. Let's build more drones. Let's do space and cyber. And I think that's right now. That's where the government is. And I think part of our job as campaigners and everything else is to say, well, actually, I'm really worried about the carbon crisis. I really want us to be decarbonising the economy. And actually, I think it really will help in terms of stopping large amounts of money flowing into Saudi Arabia that then used to buy a whole ton of weapons. But strangely, again, the government seems strangely reluctant to stop the money coming in from the oil and then all the weapon sales to the Saudis. It seems to be this kind of thing they want to keep doing. So we have to put pressure on them to stop.
Kirsten, in the 80s, there was a percentage that was often quoted that it was about 47% of all science and technology research was linked to the military in some way, and therefore we somehow needed the military to kind of prop up the economy and so on and so forth. So it was all part of this justification of the military industrial complex. Any ideas where we stand? What's now the figure in terms of what research, how much research depends on military?
I think that's a really good question, and we were touching on the sort of 1.75 billion pounds worth of military research that they were planning to do, I think, on an annual basis over 3 years, and I think it was again on a par with some of the civil stuff. The thing to say though is that military spending is typically a government choice. The idea that spending money on research to support arms trade jobs generates jobs. You could spend your money on textile research. You could spend your money on healthcare research for a better figure. What I'll do though is I'll boot the question along a little bit in the sense of funny enough, we are actually running a conference on the very subject that we're talking about, and we're going to have Stuart Parkinson from Scientists from Global Responsibility, who is in fact a leading expert on the balance between sort of scientific research for military purposes and for civil purposes, and that will be taking place next week. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, sign up. It's not just for students or academics, it's for anybody who's interested in how we're spending our research money. And I will be really looking forward to seeing Stuart Parkinson. I'm definitely going to the conference because I'm running the Zoom, so I'll be hidden away, but I'll be running. So yeah, so that's again on the CAAT website, the events page, and you can, yeah, they're actually, the whole focus actually of this year's conference at the Gates conference is around science, technology, engineering, and maths students and courses and funding and expenditure, and how we actually shift that spending away from military expenditure towards human needs, especially climate stuff and health especially. So I don't have the precise answer, but I know who does. Stuart Parkinson from Scientists for Global Responsibility, and he's talking at a CAAT event next week. You should come.
Thank you.
And if you don't, by the way, it'll be online as well, so that will answer the question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm just going to squeeze in one other question, if you don't mind, Kirsten. Do you think it's a good thing for the UK that Prince Andrew has had to go to ground and is no longer being an ambassador for all of these wonderful exports that the British can offer the rest of the world?
Well, you know, it is the thing. The royal family's involvement in arms selling has been a real problem over the last few years, and I think that's the thing. And I think the reason they've got involved is because when you look at these despotic regimes in places like Saudi Arabia or the different emirates, you know, in the United Arab Emirates, they're obviously run by their royal families, and so there's this kind of royal to royal connection. But I would say that even though Prince Andrew is no longer involved, you're still seeing, for example, the King of Bahrain coming to the horse show at Windsor, for example. You know, you still had the state visit of the Saudi king during I think it was the early 2010s. So that still goes on. So unfortunately, it's not Prince Andrew or even Prince Charles, it's the system. And they're just, the royal family are told, hey, you know, this is needed for an important British export. This is not a thing to do. This is a thing you should be doing. But it is quite interesting that after the most recent big Saudi weapons deal, Prince Charles stopped doing those sorts of visits because of the public criticism he received. And so taking, if you like, letting the royal family know that they shouldn't be involved in arms dealing is clearly a thing that people can do. I have to say, it's not something that we've run a campaign on for a little while, but we did make a big thing of Prince Charles being involved in it.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Are there any other questions that people feel that they haven't had answered yet? So anyway, Kirsten, I must say, I've been incredibly impressed that most people in your position and with your experience tend to become quite cynical, but in a way you've become more stoical than cynical, in the sense that on a number of occasions you said, well, that's all well and good that we've produced all these things, if only it wasn't for what we're not spending on climate change, for example. So I'm very impressed that your stoicism is something that perhaps is your defense against all of this ridiculous stuff that's happening. Anyway, certainly I've found it incredibly informative and very enjoyable to have you as our speaker. So thanks ever so much. And let's show our appreciation, everyone. Thank you. You can take yourselves off Zoom if you want.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. No, really, again, really pleased to have come here and had a chat. And isn't it great that, you know, that the wonders of Zoom means we can kind of do it from our homes. But as I say, I only live in Reading, so should there be a sort of face-to-face opportunity, I'm really keen to come across. I went to school in Steventon, so I know Faringdon pretty well. So it'd be quite nice to come out and say hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks again, everyone. And we'll close the meeting now.
Thank you. Thank you and all the best. See you later.
Thanks, Kirsten. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.